Welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. The global order is facing multiple pressures: wars in Europe and the Middle East, record displacements, and deepening great power rivalries. Institutions like the United Nations and the Bretton Woods system were built for a different era. Are we seeing a temporary stress test or a long-term structural crisis of multilateralism? To discuss this, we're joined by Mr. Friis Bach. He's a prominent Danish politician, economist, and former UN official. He has served as Denmark's Minister for Development Cooperation from 2011 to 2013 and as Under Secretary General of the United Nations, leading the UN Economic Commission for Europe from 2014 to 2017. A member of the Liberal Party Venstre, he specializes in foreign affairs, development, and sustainability, providing a unique perspective on how global institutions navigate complex crises. Thank you very much for joining, Mr. Bach.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now, my first question is, the international system is facing overlapping pressures from major wars in Europe and the Middle East to record displacement and deepening great power rivalry. So institutions like the United Nations and the Bretton Woods system were built for a different era. Are we looking at a temporary stress test or multilateralism or deeper structural breakdown of the global order?
Well, I'm deeply worried about the international world order and the multilateral institutions. When I worked in the United Nations, I worked in Geneva. And I actually went to work every morning in the building called Palais des Nations, an enormous building, but it was not created for the United Nations. It was created for the League of Nations after the First World War. And the tragic thing about this building is that almost exactly when this building was finalized for the League of Nations in 1938, Germany withdrew from the League of Nations, Japan withdrew from the League of Nations, and we had the Second World War. And this followed after a period of increased nationalism and protectionism. So every morning I went to work in this enormous building. I told myself, never again. We must learn from history. But right now we see some of the same developments as we saw in the 1920s and 30s. We see nationalism, we see protectionism, we see countries, not least the United Nations, withdrawing from several UN organizations. And we see international free trade, which is the motor in the international cooperation, being now threatened by, I said, nationalism and protectionism. So I'm deeply worried, and we have to stand firm now, and we have to stand together, the countries in the world, the middle powers, the stronger powers, and countries with like India and Europe. We have to stand together and protect the multilateral world order and the international institutions that we have created together.
Thank you for highlighting that. And Mr. Bach, you have served both as an Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Europe and as Secretary General of the Danish Refugee Council. So from inside these institutions, where is the gap today between what multilateral bodies are expected to deliver and what they are actually capable of doing?
Well, I often say that if you talk about the United Nations, and here I can agree with President Trump, has a lot of potential, but is often not able to fulfill this potential because they are kept in a very strict control by member states. And sometimes I say, if we want the multilateral institutions and the United Nations to deliver, we must set the United Nations free, and we must allow the UN Secretary General to be able to manage the organization to a much larger extent than today. today, I've been in the UN. I once proposed just to move one staff member from one office. It was somebody dealing with our software and IT. I proposed to remove this one person from one office and to a joint office with another organization. And my member states, especially with Russia in the forefront, they blocked me from doing this. And that shows how limited leadership space that you have in the United Nations, where the countries often over manage and manage down in the very small details the UN institutions that blocks them from actually fulfilling their potential. So I think this is something world countries should understand, that if we micromanage the UN, then the United Nations will be less than the sum of the member states. But if we allow the United Nations more freedom to manage and lead in the world, then the United Nations will be more than the sum of the member states, and it can become a positive driving force in the world, for a world based on peace and progress and cooperation and human rights. And this is the role we must increasingly allow the UN to play.
Right. Wow, thank you for sharing that deep insight with us, Mr. Bach. And now the world is now experiencing the highest number of forcibly displaced people on record. So while many European countries are tightening asylum and migration policies, is Europe facing a genuine crisis of capacity or primarily a crisis of political will?
Well, you shouldn't underestimate the pressure that migration has the pressure that it has given into our societies. And I do agree that this is manageable. We can take care of the people that are coming right now, but it is creating social unrest and instability. And we have to acknowledge this, and we have to act upon it. And the best way to help people who wish to migrate or refugees is to do it to a much larger extent closer to the countries from where they live. And having people from far away striving in a difficult journey and a dangerous journey to cross perhaps the Sahara, to cross the Mediterranean, risking their lives, is not the best way to handle the pressures of migration and refugees. So what the Europe is trying is now to form strong agreements with our neighboring countries and increase the capacity closer to the countries of origin to manage these flows in full accordance with the international treaties that we have signed, the human rights treaties and the refugee convention. We must respect these, and this is a strong message from Europe. But if we do not understand the potential instability and unrest that can be created from increased migratory flows, then I am sure we will see an even further backlash, more nationalism, more protectionism, and this will be even worse for the international rule-based world order and the very principles of human rights and refugee rights that we want to protect.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. And as a former Danish Minister for Development Cooperation, you worked in an era when aid policy was centered on poverty reduction and institution building. Today, aid is increasingly tied to strategic competition, supply chains, and security interests. Has development cooperation effectively become another tool of geopolitics?
I think we have to recognize that the world has become less value-based and more transactional. And we do see some large powers, of course, the US and China, who are much more transactional in nature. At the time where we believed that we could shape the world by strong values, it's not over, but it is in a way challenged by multiple powers seeking their own interest in a multilateral arena. We can do a lot by traditional development cooperation. I strongly believe in free trade between nations, and I really welcome the recent trade agreement between the European Union and India, because I believe in the vision that is behind the foundation of the European Union, namely by trading together, by cooperating, by trading together, we shape a stronger international cooperation. And this is the driving force behind multilateralism. So trade, investments, and also backed by development cooperation in order to build institutions and policies together that can benefit our people. I strongly believe in this still. But indeed, we live in a geopolitical world where there are multiple powers competing for influence, and there we should not be naive. And also Europe should do its best to form strong partnerships and friendships in the world with trade, investments, development cooperation as key elements.
Yes, thank you for bringing that to our conversation. Now, as you know, you mentioned some countries are more transactional than value-based. Now, Europe frequently presents itself as a defender of international law and human rights, yet its responses to different conflicts are often viewed as selective. Can Europe still credibly claim moral leadership in the world of politics, or has that credibility been significantly damaged?
I think Europe still stands firmly and strongly on an international rule-based order. Right recently with Greenland, you saw Europe coming together in a strong voice for territorial integrity, for the sovereignty of nations, for the right to self-determination of people. And this is the voice that Europe has had and will always have. Obviously, we have been challenged by a number of severe crises, the brutal aggression by Russia into Ukraine, trampling on every single UN principle that we hold dear and violating the very UN Charter. It's a difficult time, but indeed in this situation you do see Europe standing firm on a rule-based international order and reaching out to partners and friends all over the world to join hands in protecting this rule-based world order. This is where Europe has been since the Second World War, and this is where Europe should remain and will remain. And I hope many other countries will join hands with us in protecting the very vision behind the UN and the UN Charter, namely a world shaped by peace and progress and human rights.
Thank you for highlighting that. And Mr. Bach, now taken together from multilateral institutions and refugee protection to development aid and Europe's global role, what single political or institutional shift would most improve the world's ability to manage crisis over the next decade? Are you ultimately optimistic or pessimistic about the future of global cooperation?
Right now, I am worried about the future of international cooperation, not least because of the wave of nationalism and protectionism we see. And the US, who have been the founder of the multilateral institutions since the Second World War, engaging in a tariff war against so many other countries in the world, undermining the World Trade Organization. Because if we suddenly believe that we can stop problems by putting tariffs at our borders, then we will undermine international cooperation. It is only when we have free trade and when we cannot just stop the problems at our borders that we are forced to cooperate. And therefore, the increasingly free trade we have seen in the past decades has been the motor of multilateralism. And if this motor is suddenly stopped or blocked from functioning, then I am deeply worried about the international multilateral system. But for every reaction, there's a counter-reaction. And I do believe that the middle powers of the world will stand together and protect the multilateral order. And this is what we see. We've just seen the European Union forming a strong trade agreement with Mercosur and with India. We have seen new trade agreements in between other countries as well. And I think this is something that leaves me optimistic, that people still want to have an open, rule-based world order where we cooperate, where we choose cooperation instead of conflict, where we choose peace and progress instead of nationalism and protectionism. This momentum is coming. It's a reaction. I do believe we can stand firm on it. And from what I see and how we act in Europe, I remain optimistic.
Yes, you're making me optimistic as well. Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Bach. Now,
Thank you.
thank you. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of The Focal Length. For more international news and updates, stay tuned on NewsX World.